Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin. My guest for this one is going to be Dardo, who is Director of League of Legends at FNATIC. Let's just start right there, Dardo, right? Initial question I would have is, as far as I know within esports, if people know traditional sports terminology, people would describe your role as sort of like general manager in American sports, where it's like you sort of decide some of the transfers and the longer term picture of, where the team's going to be. Maybe the coach has input as to who joins. Would that be accurate? Was that what Director of League of Legends involves?
Yeah, I think that is accurate. I think in my case, I also take other tasks within Fnatic, like more on the strategy of other departments also, like involved with our central team. As you know, Fnatic is based in London, and we have an office in Berlin, and I am the most senior person in our Berlin office. So I am kind of the link between everything that we do in London and everything that we are doing in League of Legends. And also my background, I've been already now like for 7 years and a half, I think, like in esports. But before that, I didn't come from esports. I came more from the business side, technological innovation, startups, stuff like that. So that's why I also participate on other strategies more connected to like the legal stuff, the marketing, and things like that are also more 360 in that regard.
Right, obviously, most of the people who watch my content are pretty hardcore fans. I would actually say a lot of them don't know the business side of the scene, but as fans, they support the game. They know the results. So I will say, I'll preface this by saying, if people look at traditional sports, it's not really about like whether someone's good or bad at their job. It's more like the fan perception. Like, is that person to blame for someone? Did they make a decision? What are the expectations? Like the joke, obviously, in sports is if you're for the best teams in the world, if you're like Real Madrid, actually coming second might be failure, even though that would be success for someone else. So I preface this all, Dardo, to say that like a lot of people in the general manager position, I would say you have got quite a notorious reputation. Essentially, look, people know Fnatic fans already don't like it if the team doesn't win, but it feels like if they ever feel like the lineup's sort of like not good enough, they just blame you. Like it seems like your name's the one that has become the one synonymous. It's not, I know it's not a coach, it's not the org itself. They seem to specifically think it's you. So actually, before we get into some of the rosters, I want to ask you about some of the teams you put together over the years, some of the good ones, some of the more difficult ones. I just want to know what your sense is in that regard. Like, do you agree? Do you have a sense from the community? Like some fans think it's all you, or you're somehow the one whose plan this is all following. What's your sense?
Well, I actually like somehow agree. I think I am being the first one to target, and I am fine with that. I am the front line, I'm the ultimate. I am the responsible of everything that happens in League of Legends, and I don't hide from that. I think it grows a bit more because people put the blame on me on things that are actually not my fault. Let's say in my career in esports, I participated in Origin and H2K, and probably as you know very well, I had nothing to do with roster building in those two like projects, and people just believe that I like that they just connect wrong dots basically, and they say, oh, in Origin like played relegations, and then Dardo was there, so I am connecting a wrong dot there because I was only doing business in there. Like I was nothing to do. I was doing a sponsorship, I was doing relationship with Riot, the stuff like that, but I had nothing to do with the roster at that point. Same with H2K, we had Richard Wells like was running basically everything that had to do with roster decisions, and he was great at that. He was with very limited budgets compared to other teams, like getting really good results. But obviously, like I was there just supporting from a management, a strategical standpoint, more on the business side. And people, again, also connect that wrong dot. So once I am in Fnatic, then they are connecting the right dots. Everything that happens in Fnatic, it's ultimately my responsibility. I would say also not solely my responsibility. I work in a team of people like that, where there are people involved from the central team also on the decision making. So this is not my own company. I am not taking decisions on my own. I of course play a leadership role in when it comes to decision making, but it is not that I take decisions on my own. And therefore, I am fine with being, again, targeted as the front line. But I would like also to clarify that every decision that we take is in consensus with several people that participate in the central team also from FNATIC.
Okay, one thing I would ask is, since, as you say, it was only in FNATIC where you took over this role and you have some responsibility for what the lineup is or input, etc. Right? If people don't know, before this, the person who had your job title was obviously Youngbok, and he also was there in like season 9. And those are pretty big shoes to fill, someone would say. What do you think of that? Like, taking on the legacy. I mean, this is someone who he'd won like 6 championships in your team. It was still a very successful squad. What would you say about that, replacing Youngbok?
Well, I admire Youngbok on as someone who has, as you said, like had a greatly successful career like in esports. But I could say that we are completely different roles. Like Youngbok is obviously super expert on the game. He has been a coach himself, and I believe when he was director, and I think this happens is like across the all 10 LEC teams. I think there is not 2 general managers that have the same role, basically. So I think, let's say, as a team director, Youngbok was completely different team director than me. He was probably way more focused on the game, way more focused on the scouting, way more focused on all that, while I have been way more focused on managing the Berlin office, like relations with Riot, all this. And of course, there is a part which is off-season and all this. But in that one, I surround myself with people who have like better knowledge. Like we use data to analyze our decisions. We obviously involve our coaching staff when we are like between some options. So yeah, like probably Youngbok could be way more educated from the in-game aspect in some of these decisions than I could be, and I am probably way more involved on the strategical and business side and legal side of FNATIC on the day-to-day, like than he was when he was here.
Well, as you kind of hinted at there, but one thing I did want to know is, as you say, if you're someone who's responsible for the whole project as the director, in a way, people can say you are responsible for the decision, but it doesn't mean you made the decision. So, as you hint at there, if an off-season comes around, since you're not like the super expert about the game, so it's not like you're going only off your own eye test, can you give me a sense, how does FNATIC even sort of populate the list of names it wants to go after? How does the shortlist get created? Like, are you using like scouts that have worked with FNATIC before? Do the coaches like give a list of players they want? Like you say there about data, I know some teams now, there are actually apps, if people don't know, that can sort of track different metrics, and they have like very clever formulas that are quite advanced to check like how good you are versus everyone playing that role and stuff. I've heard a lot of these stories. Like what is your approach?
I think the approach has been evolving with time since I arrived. I think there were some, let's say, signings that didn't require even like a super deep level of knowledge of to sign. I don't know, like players like Upset, like you know how good Upset it is, and you like back in the days, or to sign Humanoid, like these are kind of players that you don't require to be an expert in League of Legends to know that these guys are like really good at the game. And still, those has been obviously validated by our coaching staff, like in the more in-game aspect. And we have always had some advice from the outside also, like, let's say, non-biased experts in the game that could give us their view on how this could fit, combined obviously with other kind of checks that are more behavior or personal checks to understand how they could fit in our environment or our structure. And I think, as you were saying, we are entering more on the era of data also, because we have been taking in more rookie players like lately. And for that, obviously, unless you are very expert or you are like watching like all the ERL leagues and having a lot of insight into that, obviously it becomes more difficult. So we are analyzing, given that this is at the end of the day a video game and we have a lot of data at hand, we are investing into understanding better how do success look like from earlier stages from a data standpoint. What kind of metrics are the ones that identify a player that can develop greatly in the future years? And then obviously we have a I could say, a pretty good know-how, like internally, like on how to develop and build these players, because we have proven it over the years, and our results are there. So yeah, basically that's more where we are going for, like, and what the shift that we have been doing more from, let's say, pure eye test to a combination of eye test and data.
I noticed that around the time when you took over in FNATIC is when Mithy became the coach of the FNATIC League of Legends team. Obviously, you were both in different capacities in Origin previously. Was there any connection in that sense as to why he took over as a coach? Was that a decision you made?
The reality is that I arrived into FNATIC, my first year, the roster was completely built.
Right.
I arrived on December, and it was straight after off-season. The 5 players were decided, Selfmade was signed, Mithy was signed as a head coach, and I think I participated in the last bites of people who were going to support, like in the coaching stuff, like in the interviews and all this, but the roster itself, it was basically made in FNATIC already back in then.
Well, that's one thing I would ask about immediately then. So another thing that actually I think people in sports, in esports, is obviously just a mirror of this. They also sometimes don't know that detail, which is like not every manager that takes over a team decided all the players in the offseason. So this actual lineup, though, on paper, though, I mean, it looks like a slam dunk, right? It was basically the team from the year before, plus Selfmade, who everyone thought was a very strong jungler. Like, this isn't a bad first lineup to take, right?
Yeah, that was the first lineup. It was not an easy one to manage. Like, obviously, they were all amazing players, like in the Rift, that is no doubt. But strong personalities.
I've heard there was a bit of friction between certain people.
Yeah, strong personalities, strong egos. First year of Mithy as a head coach, which also it's a big challenge in front of him when he joined. Not a super developed structure already, and that's why I entered in FNATIC to develop a better like structure on site, and we have gone from being on a, let's say, a gaming house, like which is a big apartment, to go to a big facility, like a professional one. I think, from what I have seen, if not the best, one of the best for sure of the LEC in terms of performance-oriented facility. These kind of things is what I was more focusing on. And yeah, that roster, I mean, we didn't win the LEC. We played 2 finals that year. We qualified to Worlds. We got reverse swept by Top Esports, if I remember correctly, in quarterfinals. It was, let's say, a decent year, but we didn't win. But given how hard that group was to manage, I think it was a great result. And basically, since then, what we learned, or that was my vision. That was one of the visions I brought to FNATIC, is, of course, we need to have high talented players, but we need to try to have people who are easier to work with, and that you can basically, that they connect and are on the same page. Like, just having purely talented players, like, without connecting themselves together, that will not work. But it was not an easy trip. I think we are in a really good position right now, like after a few years. But when you are FNATIC, you cannot just completely burn all the bridges and just say, okay, I rebuild the whole roster for next year, because then you might not qualify to Worlds, you might not be at the top, and that is not acceptable. So it has been a transition that has gone step by step, and I think at times slower than we would have loved. But I think we are as I said, we are in a really good place right now, on players that really want to be here, that want to play with each other, that are on the same pace, that we don't have like conflictive players or players who are not aligned with our vision on how to work in the day-to-day. So we are pretty fine. Like, in that regards, I'm really happy with the transition that we have been able to do.
One thing you said there, actually, that I think's notable that I'll ask about, is where you said that you don't want to just like take the whole lineup and be like, right, scrap that, we're just going to start from zero again and build up for. This is something I would actually say, if I've noticed in League of Legends, is that approach of just trying to put 5 names into a team that had never played before is really dangerous. It feels like that gamble doesn't pay off that often. It's actually one of the reasons I think a lot of the super teams fail. So if people look at the first couple of years you were in FNATIC, it is the case that if you look, it's basically like 1 or 2 names changed gradually initially, and then the lineup sort of changed. And yes, eventually it's a totally different lineup years later, but it's gradual. It's like I say, one or two pieces coming in, you're keeping pieces that you presumably trust or rely on. Is this like being part of your strategy? Because another thing I know that's key to the general manager role that a lot of the coaches might say they don't get is the idea you're supposed to be able to have a longer term vision, a few years ahead. You can be building towards something, whereas sometimes coaches do have the perception like it's like this split, I have to have the result or I'm fired, basically. Have you been able to sort of have a bigger picture vision of how you've built out the FNATIC squad?
The short answer is yes, but in the middle we went through a pandemic, and that changes completely the esports industry or the esports scene, and how we were building rosters and all this. So
what were the challenges compared to normal when that happened, would you say?
I mean, basically, I think the whole financial situation has completely changed in terms of there were two main drivers of finance of the teams that were investment in general, that it was easy to raise capital. Sure. Back in the days, and it was easy that you raise capital to invest it into the teams, grow into the marketing, not only on the players, into the structures, everything, and that way the value obviously of the org of the company was going to go up, and you were that was a cycle that was being repetitive, and no one saw coming that obviously that at some point is always going to stop, but no one saw it coming that abruptly that it's sure. going to, and that was a big change, and the combination of let's say international events that have happened, like the COVID, the war, and all these are also changing a bit the vision of some of the, let's say, more non-endemic companies that are they have to build their budgets and forecast for the next year on where they are going to invest in terms of growth and all this, and they are cutting down obviously the cost on partnerships and advertising and all this, and the very little that they continue and they keep, obviously they put it into other buckets that are more traditional, probably like TV adverts and things like that, especially when you are talking about big brands. And so one of the first things that they are dropping is this kind of innovation stuff where maybe they are building more for perception or for the future. If I use, for example, I don't know, a car brand, maybe a car brand is not selling a lot of cars right now while sponsoring us, but they are putting the perception into the minds of the customers, and probably because of all these international events, they have to go more to the short term, and the short term is not esports, and that has happened a lot. So we have seen a lot of drop in terms of the obviously the investment, or well, it's not an investment, but the let's say the incomes that we were getting through there, and obviously that has changed the ecosystem financially, and how I think that has also made it more equal in between teams, like bottom tier teams with top tier teams. I think the difference are lower than they used to be, and yeah, on teams that also had a lot of their incomes were coming from sponsors and this kind of stuff, or where they were in complete growth and they were being ambitioning to build new things. Obviously, they were depending also a lot into the investments that they were coming in, and we were one of those. We were one of a complete expansion, and suddenly we had to stop that expansion, and we had to focus more on sustainability. And sustainability, when you come from focus on expansion, comes now with cutting cost, being more efficient, trying to take better decisions, and all this. And I'm happy that even when we have been in that road to sustainability, cutting those costs, we have been able to maintain the performance level that we were having, which is, it has not been easy at all. I think it's, obviously I'm not going to disclose numbers, but we are in way lower budgets than we used to be, and still performing at the same level. And I will never be proud of losing, but definitely I am not embarrassed of being 4 years in a row qualifying to Worlds, and 4 years out of the 4 years in summer we have played 3 finals, and one top 3 position that we lost to Rogue in Malmo in the finals weekend, and they end up winning the tournament. So yeah, for sure, in these 4 years we haven't won the LEC, and that is something that obviously it's a regret of ourselves and something that we need to keep working on to turn that around. But as I said, I am not embarrassed of what we have done at all, because I think we are very consistent at the top.
Along those lines, again, we obviously won't talk in specifics. We're going to talk generally about anything financial. But if people don't know, I get the perception that people take like success in the game and they think it's like sports, where people don't follow like football, for example. It's very rare that a team that doesn't spend much money is going to be near the top of the table, because obviously the top teams just buy all the best players, and they have they have players on the bench who could play on the lower tier team, right? People's perception is because of the success of Fnatic, like G2 and Fnatic are always the teams in the finals and they're always returning back to the top. People's perception is Fnatic must just be like Real Madrid. They must just have all the money, and they must. I know this isn't the case for many years now. I mean, I would say beyond maybe G2 and the odd other team that came in very early on with lots of VC, some teams come in the first couple of years. Like a lot of the GMs I've heard behind the scenes, like there's way more competition for these players than people know. They don't just automatically go to your team because it's Fnatic. That's more like a story from 10 years ago, where it's just you go to Fnatic or SK or whoever it might be back in the day. So the question I would have is, even though the perception is you're in Fnatic, you're supposed to win. It's a bit like a Manchester United fan now. They still think they're supposed to win every year because Manchester United, when they were a boy, they would win every time. But if you look at the sport, there's other competition. So my question would be, do you have a sense, do you feel as though there's a pressure, like you have to win because you're the GM of Fnatic?
Well, I put the pressure myself on, just by myself. I don't need anyone to put the pressure on myself. If I am in Fnatic, it's because I want to win. And I always say this, like, we are privileged by being able to work on things that we like and we enjoy. But these kind of jobs come with a lot of sacrifices also. Like, you are like 8-9 months away from your home, from your beloved ones, like traveling, maybe in cities that you don't enjoy that much. Like, I am a Spanish guy that have like 20 something degrees outside here, like going to Berlin, going to Berlin and all this. It's not that exciting, like, and being there and suffering with the team. I mean, it's part of the things that we really enjoy, like, of our job, but it's also, there is a big part of sacrifice. So if I wouldn't have the hunger to win, if I wouldn't have and to compete, like, obviously it's the players who compete, but you get my point. Like, to be there supporting them, I am 100% of the time with them. Like, if I wouldn't have that hunger, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. That's for sure. Like, and I don't think, like, as I said, like before, I didn't come from this, so I don't need this. Like, I have 2 degrees in the university and 1 master degree. I have years of professionalism. Like, I started to work with 18 years old. Like, I don't need this for a living. I just do this because I really like it. And I think there are parts where for sure I need to improve. I keep learning every year since I'm here. There are people who have been here forever, like yourself. I was mentioning before Richard Wells. These are people who I learn like every year, like, because you have a lot more experience in here. But there are things that I also believe I am quite good at, like, because I come from having other professional experience that I believe it's really useful and really helpful into the ecosystem, and that not many other people that are inside the ecosystem right now have. So I lost a bit of track where the question was. Sorry,
I'll ask you another one. Right, here's what we'll do on some of the questions about specific players or lineups. I'll make the question quite open-ended, and you just tell me what you can answer. So a question I have is, at the end of this first year, you faced what I actually know from behind the scenes was a tricky scenario, which is, people might have heard this story that supposedly Rekkles said, as in just verbally, like, yeah, I'll probably stay in the team. And then the team started to be built in the off-season. And then essentially, people might know the story. All of a sudden, like some wrestling movie, just went to G2 out of nowhere. Now, look, yeah, you were able to get upset, like, which, as you alluded to earlier, that's a pretty slam dunk signing. Like, if you can't have Rekkles, upset's the next big name. But at the same time, I imagine in your first year where you're actually getting a chance in the off-season to shape the team, it must be kind of tricky to deal with a scenario where a big name you potentially think you're building from, because if people don't know, part of how you get other players to join you say, I've got this person here, and then they decide they like that person, don't they? Was this a difficult challenge to face?
Yeah, I mean, I think emotionally it was very difficult because we were committed to as you said, we were committed to stay with Rekkles, and we started to build some plans around him. If you tell me 6 months ago, like before that, I was, as a new person that comes in and looks at everything like really like open and all this, I was questioning internally, is it 100% that we need to stick to Rekkles? Like is this something that is it mandatory thing? Like because obviously it's a big part of our branding, but
Sure.
like I'm for sure he had upsides in our team, but he also had some contributions that were not always perfect and as any other player. So it was, and I was trying to wait, is it more what he is giving us to what he takes from us, like and all this? But then we had several conversations. Obviously I still like did all this waiting, as I was saying, and we decided that we were going to stick to him. And yeah, like that was a very last minute change, like of strategy. As you said, like we had two very solid options in the market that they were basically waiting for, like what team was Rekkles going to choose, and then they knew that the other one was going to be available. That was, if I remember correctly, that was Crowny and Upset.
Right.
So we could even choose, like at that point, between two very promising talents, and that's why I believe it was, let's say, less like stressful from a in-game perspective, but emotionally and for what it meant for the branding and obviously going to the biggest rival and all this, that was a hard situation to deal with, of course.
One thing I would ask is, people know that the next season that the team began and basically it was like almost the same team, except now you had Niski instead of Nemesis and you had Upset instead of Rekkles. But you look at the lineup, it still looks awesome on paper. But then you had this weird thing where it didn't perform that well in the spring split. And then in summer was probably I think this is up there with like caps and perks, like role swapping. It's like a crazy roster move. The idea that like Adam comes in from the Challenger League, so no one even knows this guy that much in LEC. And then Whippo role swaps, but it actually worked. Like the team obviously got to the finals and was actually going to Worlds and stuff. What I would ask is this, again, open-ended. When people look at the lineup for spring, that still looks great now, mate. Like if you told me that lineup was entering LEC now, I'd say it'd have a chance to be like a Worlds team. Give us some sense. What went wrong? Why did the team have to do this drastic change in the middle of the split, even though it did work?
I mean, we were a bit still on the same path as the year before. Very talented players that were not very aligned and on the same page. And that is something that we had to solve. And solving is either they commit to each other and they want to stick to each other, or then we need to break something and take some risks. And one of the things that I have never been afraid of is taking risks, like on these things. And in that scenario, if I remember correctly, Duncan, like Selfmade, Hilisan, and Weepo's contract were running out. Like because when I arrived into FNATIC, there was not a clear policy about how to deal with the contract length and all this, and that is something that I like pushed to implement on trying to not enter into last year of contract with players, having only players that are committed to the long term, stuff like that. So, but in that moment, that was still impossible, and these were players that were for a really long time in FNATIC. So that is something that came more like afterwards with some of the players that I started to sign myself. And basically, I remember like I wanted to see like if they were committed to extend, and I felt that some of the players were saying that I will not extend because this player is here, and then I don't want to be continuing with him next year and all this. And in that scenario, that's where I was like, okay, if we have players that are not committed to stay with each other, why would we put them together in summer? Like, yeah, sure, they can do a last dance thing that they can try their best and all this, but we just come from being 3-0 versus Salke, I think, like in first round of playoffs, and it's like, I mean, then I prefer to invest into some rookie talent and all this. And this one was one of those decisions that I took myself, even with my limited knowledge of the game, but based on, let's say, pieces of information that you get from different places. And probably not all my coaching staff was super aligned with this decision back in the day, but I said, I understand, but I'm going to commit to this one because basically the alternatives that I was being presented, I didn't like them at all. But this was from a purely logical standpoint. I was being presented with options that were more bringing back a retired player, like stuff like that. And then I was hearing from different sources that within the game that Adam was a very promising talent. And I also had information internally from feedback that we get after every year with the players and all this, that Wipo has thought about re-rolling to jungle before. So that it kind of came naturally that this could be an option. I remember like Wipo saying, whatever it happens, like even if we can stick to self-made, I really want to talk to him about how he needs to jungle in order for us to be better and all this. So, and it kind of came natural that he could be like a jungler, and it kind of came natural that there was a promising talent in the ERL that could fit into the role, and especially that could fit more onto a long-term strategy of players that want to be here, that are in long-term contracts, and that don't have problems with each other. So that's where the decision was coming from, basically.
Even though in the end, the result looks great, you made the finals, you got to go to Worlds. The question I would have is this. If people forget, because this team had to go through the lower bracket, you had to win 3 games that were best of 5 all the way to the 5th game. It was a 3-2 results in a row. That must have been pretty nerve-wracking for you, right? I mean, this is a pretty out there gamble. If you lose any of these game 5s, there's no Worlds, and who knows, right? Who knows what people would think of this move you'd done?
Yeah, no, of course. And that's always what it comes with risk, but when you are in a situation that it's still not amazing, like sticking to the same thing, like doesn't feel like very logic or very smart. So that's where you prefer to take a gamble. And in this case, obviously, like that comes with a great effort and great work behind the scenes from everyone in my staff. But we kind of turned things around and it worked. And because, as I said, I think we have a pretty good know-how on how to develop these players, onboarding them and all this. It is a very stressful environment to be in FNATIC in general because of the pressure that you were talking before, and that also it's something that we need to deal with. But in general, I think we have had very good results when doing these kind of moves.
Right, people will know, obviously, we never really got to find out what would have happened at Worlds because there was the whole situation where Upset had to return home, Bean came in as like the sub, and then it just wasn't the real lineup. Now, if what people might not know is I know Upset and I know the actual story that went on there, and I don't think it's ever all fully been revealed. I don't know if it ever will be, it's up to them. But put it this way, the story I heard, if I was Upset, I would 100% return in this scenario. It made perfect sense to me. It was one of those ones where basically it was extreme enough situation that like sometimes things are more important than the game, and you have to take care of real life, right? But what I would ask you is this. It does feel like, even though it's not like anyone blames FNATIC for the results at Worlds, but I do feel like the drama that came out of that with Adam and with Upset, and then the whole thing of people essentially, I feel like part of it was almost like fans are angry that they'll never get to know the reason why, even though it's quite a personal reason, which is why I didn't reveal it myself. Like, what do you think about that whole mess? Because I feel like to me, if you know what went on, it's quite understandable, but it feels like some people, I mean, dude, I get the implication the Adam player's still salty about this. He's a bit mad about it. What do you think about the way that all blew up? It seems like it came out of nowhere.
There is so much information that I obviously cannot disclose, and I have taken myself like a bit disconnected from the question that I will come back to like questioning a bit, but a bit disconnected from the question. There have been many dramas in FNATIC, and I have always taken the position of right or wrong to not go against players like publicly, like and expose some of the wrong arguments or wrong stuff. And I think sometimes wrong because some more transparency or some more clarity would have helped to understand people what was going on. But on the other side, me as a guy that gets older, 34 years old, like, and you're dealing with players that are 18, 19, 20, way less experience in life, they get upset and emotional about changes in roster and things like that, which is completely normal, and I absolutely understand. So even if they focus sometimes in the wrong things or even in the wrong information, I felt in those moments that going out could damage their careers, and that is something that I would not forgive myself like for doing, even if in that moment I am like, the word is not hating, but like I am really upset with what they are doing, or the wrong information that they are putting outside, or the wrong read of the situation. I don't know. For example, I can put a really quick example, but Nemesis, like after leaving Fnatic, he did this tweet where he mentioned, I knew something along the lines of, I knew before going to before playing Worlds, I knew that I was not going to,
right?
Yeah, something like that. And people were like, he left it there, like very ambiguous, a few months after leaving Fnatic, and people started to speculate. Oh, Dardo, before coming into the gaming Worlds, he told him that he was not going to continue. He never like gave extra information about what he meant. Of course, I never like spoke to Nemesis on like before. The decision was not even made, but obviously, probably he could only guess, that it was hard that he was going to continue, because there were certain situations that happened in Worlds that he knows very well that were unsustainable, like the relationship with his coach, the relationship with some of the other teammates, the fact that Magi Felix was about to play in that Worlds, like, and he even played the scrims and all this. And like when I went, like I didn't go out publicly. I think I just said that this is a bit inaccurate or whatever, but I didn't like go deep on the information. But when I went to Nemesis, and obviously I'm telling this now because this is so many years back. Exactly. I don't think this is going to like affect Nemesis' career at all, and all this. And I am not saying it with any bad intention or any bad vibe, because I respect Nemesis. I think he has a different opinion on the matter, but I don't mind. I respect him. I like him, and I hope the best for him always. But when I ask him straight personally, dude, Tim, why did you say this? Like, I really want to understand, why do you say that you knew before? Because I didn't even take the decision before Worlds ended. So why did you say this? And he said, I heard this in Esport Maniacos, and I felt like if Esport Maniacos is saying it, normally they are super accurate with information. And like the whole scene, or a big part of the scene, thinks that I have gone to you before a game and tell you, hey, you are not going to continue here. And back then I felt, I am not going to say this, because this is going to make him like not look great. Like in his career, this can affect if he wants to go into another team in the future. And this is just a quick example of a few of these dramas that we have had, and I have taken the personal decision of not fighting or anything like that against like players, like publicly. I don't like it. I don't like dramas. I am like a chill person, like in that regards. I don't like bad vibes like with anyone. I am someone who defends Fnatic. That is my role. That is my job, and I am a very corporative guy. But yeah. And coming back to the question, Duncan, sorry for this. Like,
it's a good story.
For this bit of a break on the answer, but going back to the question, like there is so much information here that I cannot disclose of what happened in Worlds, like very personal stories, not only from Upset, like Interwinder, that like affected like many people there, like and how they perceived it. We didn't have a lot of information back then. Not even ourselves had the full story. I'm not even sure if I have today even the full story. As you said, maybe we never get the full story of these things, because they are super personal. What I know is that I knew enough to not have to say more to my players, rather than the person itself, who is the one having the issue, has to communicate with the rest of the players. And us, as responsibles and adults, and seeing how much, like in this regard, Elias was suffering, we knew this was the right choice. That's it. Like we needed to support our player in such a complicated personal situation over anything else. And I think players, because they didn't have the full picture, and there was some context and some other stuff like around there, they also connected wrong dots there, and they were like, let's say, blaming ourselves to allow like Elias to go there, like to home. when again I believe they were just connecting rondots at that point, and it's normal. And here I come again. Like, even if I don't agree with the reactions that some people had back then, let's say Adam when he went public and all this, even if I don't agree with the reaction, the reality is I can fully understand it. It's a guy that it's 19 years old. Like, his dream is coming into the LEC. He comes into the LEC. He comes to Worlds, which is the biggest stage ever that you can dream as a player. And then suddenly you are private, like you are stopped from being able to perform there. Like, how are you not going to be upset? How are you not going to be emotional? And you are 19 years old. You can commit mistakes on the interpretation of these things. But yeah, like, here I am just saying that those were wrong interpretations from many people. And very many personal, individual stories there that were crossing with each other, and yeah, not something that we can go out. And the same as we didn't go out to say anything about the story of Elias, we cannot go out to say from other people or other players and everything that was going on and why these things were happening. We just try to support everyone as much as possible in a incredibly difficult situation, difficult for everyone. Like, we as an org, or even myself as a team director, we are also working really hard to be there, and that is also our dream, like, to be there and competing. So yeah, it is a hard situation, and I hope something like this doesn't happen again to other players, like, because it is a really hard pill to swallow. Sorry, but yeah, I think we just managed the best we could in that moment.
I think a concept and a theme that's emerging in this interview as people are listening, I'll give an analogy to explain it, goes like this. So in the same way as a lot of people who are fans of professional League of Legends, when they talk about how a team should have drafted for a match, they do often make the mistake of not realizing they don't know specific things about those players. So for example, you say something like your general point, oh, they should just, draft Renekton here, but maybe you don't know that player doesn't like Renekton or doesn't like the side of the matchup. In the same sense, I think a problem a lot of us have when we're looking as an observer at rosters and how they're built, and I know I had a big problem with this for a long time, is I was looking at it like we're playing that football game, Football Manager on the PC that we all love, where you just put the names into the list. But the problem with that is it's a video game, so in the video game they're not real, they don't have to get along, they just play the match, and if they're good and you put the right stats together, you win. That's we all know how the game works. But the problem in real life, if you ever talk to coaches and GMs, is half the time what you don't know is you might think, oh, did these players, did he not play the right champion to play? It's like, no, if you actually knew behind the scenes, maybe those two players hate each other or can't communicate, or one of them, doesn't like to be like flamed directly and the other one only likes to flame people directly. You can have all these things that have nothing to do with in the server. They're all intangibles, they're all personality elements. But I feel like this is another thing that people don't take into account, right? Is when you're building a lineup, you're not really, like I said earlier, just getting the best 5 on paper, like, wow, that's an amazing lineup. You have to learn things like who is going to fit together and who can play with this guy, or who's going to actually sort of almost deny each other's abilities because they don't connect or they can't communicate. Can you give me some thoughts on this? Because I feel like this is the whole sort of hidden world of making teams that people don't see.
Yeah, and this comes again to my previous point, which is you might drop a player that is really good and people don't understand why, but you don't want to go out and say why, because like it can be many things, and they are personal, and you don't want to affect like anyone's career, like, and these are things that maybe some of them, like, they don't fit here, but they fit in another place with another org or with other players, or maybe they were going through a hard moment, but they can solve that by working on themselves and getting like stronger, like, or better at certain things. So there are so many things that can happen, and we understand that people, like, the love for the players sometimes is even above for the love of the team sometimes, like, in terms of that, like, they just follow really like a player, and they are like looking after their career and following every step, and obviously I understand that they are emotional when their favorite player is dropped or changed or things like that. But there, as you said, there is so much information, and sometimes it's not even individual thing from that player. It's just, are they on the same page? Do they want to be together? Like, are they like functioning well together? Like, how they play? There are, and it's not only also like having a good relationship or not. It's also there are styles of playing the video game.
Sure.
There are there can be people that have a great relationship, but maybe they play the game completely different. Maybe they are very aggro, or maybe they are very passive, and that changes completely how we have to approach the game. So and how we build the roster. So even communication can be a great factor. There can be players that are very silent, and there are players that are very active in communication. And maybe if you have 3 that are very active in communication, then it's not working because comms are becoming messy. And there are so many factors that we have to take into account. Reality is esports is still very young. We don't have the ability. Like we try to improve. We keep like leveling up our structures, our staff, everything, but we are not yet there where there are other traditional sports where they have like 20 coaches and analysts and all this focusing on absolutely everything. We don't have the ability to track absolutely everything and take the most educated decision, but we try our best with the information and the resources we have at hand to optimize that and go to, let's say, the one that we are more confident or more sure about, basically.
Right. Another thing I want to ask about that you alluded to earlier, but I feel like a casual fan won't know what you were referring to, is when you talked about the idea that during a year before the year ends, you're looking at players and asking, does their contract end? And that's part of how you're deciding, are they going to stay or not? If people don't know, what you're referring to, as far as I know, is essentially I'll use almost like the game terms, like the meta of how contracts are done now. People will know behind the scenes was sort of established by G2. It's the style where, like you're describing, you either like extend the person and then you have the choice to actually build around them, or if they go, like would have happened to Yori and Mad Lions is a good example this year, it just didn't happen, you sell them, and you sell them for like $1 million or something, you get like a good return on it. Because if you're a casual fan, the problem is you can't always be the one doing big buyouts but then never getting anything yourself on the other end of the contract, otherwise the company just loses money. So the idea is, in the same way as you're going to buy Wonder, you have to be able to sell this other player in a year from now to, balance the budget. I hope that makes sense to a casual fan. So the point I would make is this: on the other side though, that's why, I mean, it's like the Rekkles story before. The problem with that story was he was a free agent then. So if he really does go, yeah, I'm in the team, but any second he decides before he signs, like maybe I'm not, he can just walk, and you can't build a team that way. Like, I mean, that's I asked that question earlier. Like, you can't have the biggest piece on the board suddenly just disappear while you're trying to connect the other pieces to it. So can you give some thoughts? Like I say, I tried to do a quick explanation there, but for someone who's a casual fan, as far as I know, all the top teams do this now. It's why you'll see stories that to a fan might be confusing, like the star player of the team extends for 2 years, but then he does get sold in the offseason. So the fans like, but did they want him? So can you give us some thoughts? Like, what's the logic behind from FNATIC side, like why this is the approach to take and why you choose this method of like you extend or you use it to decide who stays and who doesn't? Give me some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, initial thought is the fact that we didn't have a policy to like around the contracts. I think it cost us a few millions, like over the years.
Sure.
There are at least two big examples of players that left as a free agent.
Caps and Rekkles, the obvious ones, right?
Yeah, Caps and Rekkles.
These would be millionaire. These would be definitely millions in buyouts and stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's why when I arrived, this was one of the things that I wanted to really focus on
right.
not having these kind of situations, because it's also really stressful when you have one player that you want to keep on, and you are in the middle of the year, and you are in the middle of the competition, and you really want to focus on performance and competition, and you have to be speaking about extensions and contracts and all this kind of stuff. It's really hard. So that is something that I really wanted to implement, and we have done so. One of the things that we don't normally do is extending a contract on a player that we are not interested in the long term. Like, it can happen that something happens and suddenly you just change the strategy, but we are not normally trying to extend players that are not in our long-term plans or that they are not committed in the long term with us. That is, I understand that has happened. No, I don't think in our case, but in some other teams where they have extended and few months later they have sold, but that is not how we normally operate. What I would say though is that with the change of reality in the financial ecosystem that we are going through, buyouts are dead. So right now, extending contracts or not, it's more a matter of planification rather than a financial upside, because
There's not going to be any more $1 million buyouts, basically.
no,
Yeah.
no, and we were a bit unlucky on this, I would say, because in the moment, like, we didn't have a policy, and in the moment that we started to have a policy and we have a few names that could have been some of those big sales and
Sure.
that could have allowed us to reinvest into our team, then the market was dead with COVID and
Right.
and the war and all these things. So I don't know, I can put few examples, but we drop people like Hilisan or Upset or Wunder who have been like, they are incredible prospects in the market. And well, the market was that in that moment, and obviously this was, as I said before, like, this was impossible to see, like, with such a short term, with such an abrupt change of the reality. So yeah, like that is where now we focus more on people who we believe that can align in the long term. Then great. Obviously, there are also a difference between legacy contracts who were signed like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, like compared with the contracts that are being signed now. Like the economic, the financial reality is completely different also for those players. Will it scale it back to I don't know, if to the point where it was like 2 years ago? Like, maybe it will take a lot of time to go back to that point, but will it keep scaling? Well, if we continue doing things correctly, it will. I don't think the fact that there was a recession there, I don't think it has anything to do that with esports being a bubble or a fake ecosystem or anything like that. I think there are reasons to sustain the business that we have here, but still, obviously, things need to keep improving and things need to keep moving forward in the right direction, and not only from the team sides, but also from the tournament operators or the publishers in this case, like with in-game items and with things that facilitate like more incomes into the teams in order to be sustainable. But yeah, I think particularly in FNATIC, we are in the right track on getting some of these things in a good place.
When I make content, it isn't just me, the mic, and a guest or a topic. It's also me with the support of my whole crew. Who's that, you might ask? The Skrilluminati. That's who. They include Frisky, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Tosh, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Animosity, Tooorin, and you know it if you've heard it before, but if you haven't, a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Well, if you want to know upcoming topics and guests I'm going to have on my channel, maybe you want to ask me a question to answer in an AMA in video fashion. Do you want to hear one of those long discussions and actually be part of it and be able to ask me questions? Want to find out who I'm going to interview next? If any of these perks or more appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.